Aston Martin has improved a lot this season and they've got bigger ambitions on the horizon, but there's one thing that's still holding them back. From a driver who isn't performing to the best of his abilities, to a cutthroat decision that the team owner will have to make. Here's what we know about the dilemma that Aston Martin is facing. First, let's look at how Lance Stroll's current performance levels are making Aston Martin look like a one-man team. A few months ago, it seemed unimaginable that Fernando Alonso would help Aston Martin rise to the top. With 5 podium finishes out of 6 races, Alonso's consistency was the real reason he was able to get this far. But unfortunately, the same cannot be said for his teammate Lance Stroll. Lance's current performance levels mean that Alonso is pulling all the weight while their competitors are bringing the fight with 2 competitive drivers. He just can't match Alonso's results. Sure, Lance has shown flashes of brilliance in races like Australia, Azerbaijan and Bahrain, but his performances this season highlight a growing gap between him and his teammates. If Aston Martin had 2 drivers of Lance Stroll's caliber, would anyone consider their car a front-running contender? That's a question worth thinking about, and considering Lance's struggle to extract the full potential from the new car, it raises doubts about the competitiveness of last year's Aston Martin as well. If you look at how the team plans to close the gap with Red Bull, then a driver like Lance is a liability. In early June, Aston Martin bought a brand new package to the Canadian Grand Prix. Just look at how the side pod and floor were heavily changed. It's obvious that the update was mostly about making the car more efficient. And the team admitted that Red Bull's major DRS advantage is something they were trying to close the gap on. As F1 moves to traditional European tracks like Australia's Red Bull Ring, Silverstone and Spa-Francorchamps, Aston's high downforce skills will be put to the test again after it failed to match its street circuit form in Barcelona. Plus, team boss Mike Crack is confident that the team has enough evidence to suggest that they do better in turns on high-speed circuits, which Canada didn't have. But the changes to the car won't matter as much if one of the drivers keeps slacking. While Alonso is leading the team, Lance Stroll is really struggling in the midfield. The real challenge for Lance Stroll, the team owner and Lance's father, is the difficulty for making the tough decision to potentially replace his son. The greatest example of how harmful this dilemma is can be seen in Lance's performance at the Canadian Grand Prix. Even though he finished in 9th place, Mike Crack still praised Lance's efforts in the race, and he most likely did it on behalf of his father. But let's be real. Lance's performance will set Aston Martin back in its ambition to reach P2. It's a lot like McLaren's situation last year when Daniel Ricciardo wasn't giving the best support to his teammate Lando Norris. In Formula 1, results matter, and Aston Martin needs to perform at their best to satisfy their corporate sponsors and stakeholders. It's obvious they've made big investments in their factory and facilities, and high-profile signings like Dan Fallows as the technical director just show their ambition to be a front-runner. Lance Stroll can't ignore his son's performance level indefinitely, especially if Aston Martin is beaten by Mercedes or Ferrari while having one of the strongest cars on the grid. With sponsors like Cognizant and Aramco, Aston Martin's success is crucial to maintaining its support and financial backing. Up until 2021 though, Lawrence kept defending his son against this kind of criticism, and it looks like he isn't the only one on Lance's side. Alonso also wanted us to know that Lance has had a run of bad luck. It's like the racing gods haven't been on his side lately. Let's rewind and analyze the situation to understand what he's talking about. Stroll's problems worsened with a wrist injury from a pre-season cycling crash, which almost put his participation in the first race in doubt. But hey, he showed some serious grit and drove with one hand in Bahrain, proving he's got the speed. Then we moved to Jeddah, where Lance was sitting pretty in 5th place ahead of the Ferraris when an exhaust problem struck. Talk about rotten luck, right? Next stop, Miami. Stroll narrowly missed out on progressing from Q1 while Alonso made it through. The team tried to pull off a strategy move by not using a second set of soft tyres in the first round, but it ended up compromising Lance's race. Risk-taking can be a double-edged sword, and let's not forget the glamour of Monaco. Alonso qualified on the front row, but poor Lance failed to make it to the final 10. Why? Well, his first run in Q2 wasn't up to speed. Then he lost precious time at the weighbridge, and to add insult to injury, debris from Lando Norris's McLaren messed up his final run. What a mess! Now, Alonso wants us to understand that Lance's recent results might make it easy to criticize him, but there's more to the story. In Monaco's FP3, Lance was within just 1/10.5 of the fastest time. Impressive, right? Fernando then praised Lance for providing valuable feedback, information and strategy throughout the weekend. Okay, we get it. It might be easy to suggest that Lance's recent wrist injury and other complications contributed to this setback in his performance, but the stopwatch at least doesn't lie, which is why 2 more F1 pundits called him out after the Canadian Grand Prix. During a discussion on their Formula for Success podcast, former Grand Prix team owner Eddie Jordan and ex-F1 driver David Coulthard had their take on the dilemma that Lawrence faces. Jordan started the discussion with all the investments that Lance Stroll has made into Aston Martin, making it the team we know today. Then he asked the question that's on all of our minds: are you sure that Lance can fulfill the requirements to elevate this team into a winning constructors team? As Lance Stroll, what would be your answer? And then Coulthard simply said, the stopwatch doesn't lie. He wasn't questioning Lance's abilities, but he was basically saying that with Lance's current post-injury state, he just isn't able to meet the competitiveness of the qualifying sessions. Just look at how Verstappen and Alonso were in the front at Monaco, but Lance was nowhere to be seen. Coulthard emphasized that there comes a point where excuses hold little weight. This isn't the first time that Lance's future on the team has been called into question. When Lance first joined Aston Martin in 2019, back when it was still called Racing Point, he struggled to keep up with other drivers too. It's not just Alonso that Lance seems to be lagging behind. He scored less than half the points of his former teammate Sergio Perez. The year after joining the team, Perez outdid Stroll again, even though Lance did manage some podium finishes at Sakir and Monza. In 2021, the team slowly transformed into the Aston Martin we know today. That's when they first brought in the legendary champion driver Sebastian Vettel. Ideally, they should have replaced Lance instead of forcing Perez out, since he was scoring less. Especially when you look at how, in both seasons since the rebranding, Stroll was unable to outscore Vettel. But of course, they didn't, thanks to his father. Still, it was no longer an issue of Lance having just one bad season. That's why former F1 star Johnny Herbert suggested that Lance Stroll may be running out of time in 2022. During an episode of the F1 Nation podcast, Herbert said, I sometimes think there is a certain time that, if it doesn't quite happen, Lawrence has got to go. Son, I've given you a chance. It isn't quite working out, and I've got to do what's right for the team. No matter how much faith Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso might have in Lance, F1 is ultimately a competition measured by the stopwatch, and teams make decisions based on performance. On the podcast, Coulthard also recalled instances where drivers may not have been on par with legends like Michael Schumacher, but were retained due to financial considerations. Ouch! With Mercedes getting closer every day, and Red Bull sitting at the top with Verstappen, it only remains to be seen what more upgrades the team will bring, and how things might change in the upcoming races. If Lawrence wants to see his team get to the top, then it might be time to make some cutthroat decisions. And if he doesn't make the right decision, then the team's shareholders might be forced to make one for him. And if you want to keep up with what becomes of the dilemma that Aston Martin faces, like and subscribe to the Grid Report, where we bring you the latest F1 updates.